My name is Jerry Kroth. I'm a professor in California. I wrote a book called The Roswell Foil, How UFO Discoveries Radically Change How We See the World. And I also made a video discussing that book. Okay, and that video and the book are divided into two parts, part one and part two. This video is about part three. Okay, so you don't need to read the book and you don't need to see that video. I would like to give you a short overview though, very quick, so you can see what is going on in part three, because this is a knock your socks off kind of event. So just a tiny bit of background. Part one of this book talks about the Roswell Foil. In Roswell, there was a crash. There were 10 pieces of material, roughly, and they were about 5 by 5, like aluminum foil. You could crush it and open it right back up. You could squeeze it into a marble and it would open right back up. You couldn't cut it. You couldn't puncture it. It was kind of magical material. There are 47 people in the world who have come in contact with that material, and I was one of those people. I came in contact with it in 1965. So that's how the book begins. And then we talk about expert witnesses, pilots, navigators, cosmonauts, astronauts, private pilots, radar operators, navigators, scientists, generals, Soviet generals, who say UFOs are real, and a lot of that testimony is in their own words. Okay? Then we cover the most highly corroborated UFO stories, the Phoenix Lights, all the major stories of UFOs in history that are really worth our attention, right up until we get to the Pentagon's release. Here's an excerpt of that. 2017 encounter over San Diego. Near an aircraft carrier, fighter jets are sent up, checking it out, and these are, now this is released in 2020, but this is a Pentagon release, believe.
Nickel 6-1 Tango Roger, Roger.
Oh, got it! Woohoo!
Roger, there's troubleshooting machines out here.
Did you box moving target?
602.
No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, man. Dude, that is on, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like look at that thing. It's rotating.
So those are the stories that are there. And this ends with 500, not all experts, there were 250 from the general public, but a total of 500 witnesses documented. Now, Watergate had 60 witnesses, and President Nixon resigned from those hearings. Imagine a hearing, a really fair hearing, transparent, where people were actually able to talk and take testimony with 500 people. I think the conclusion would be foregone, that indeed extraterrestrials have visited Earth in the past and continue to do so. Okay? That's how that part ends. Now, while the American people believe that to be the case, academia is dead set against it. So part two looks at the absolute impact this would have on the ironclad biases in the academic world. It looks at what happens to archaeology, what happens to mythology, what happens to biology, and basically concludes a thing called ontological shock, future shock. A whole new paradigm hits you and you have to revise your thinking about everything, okay? And this concludes on a very sad note. With a story. George Bush Sr. comes in a wheelchair, I think he's 90 some years old, to Orlando, Florida to help his son Jeb Bush, who's trying to become the Republican nominee. And he's wheeled on stage and he's going to show his support. And then somebody from the audience asks a question they didn't expect. And George Bush gives an answer they didn't expect. And they wheeled him right off the stage. And got him out of there. The question from the audience was, Mr. Bush, President Bush, when is the government going to tell the truth about UFOs? And his answer was, Americans aren't ready for the truth. Get that guy off stage. Get him out of here. So that's how the book ends. Part 2 ends. Now, part 3 is something that just happened. It's recent. It's dawned on me. It is revelatory. So I'd like to present this carefully and slowly to you. This is the culmination of this book now. This was a story about aerial Zimbabwe, which I described earlier, about these children who are in an elementary school in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And it was an upscale British school. Kids wore uniforms. There were about 200 or 300 kids, elementary school, kind of rich kids, I think. And the children went out on the playground for lunch, and the teachers went to the lunchroom for a faculty meeting. Maybe there was a janitor supervising the kids on the playground. But while they're on the playground, they see a UFO, silvery, lights around the edges, and it flies, and then it lands at the edge of their playground. Okay? And 62 of these children run towards the UFO to check it out. Okay? And a being comes out of the top of this UFO and floats down and stands in front of these children. And another being does the same. They float down off the top of this ship. Here's interviews with these kids. This is 19 years ago.
The guy was going to the sea?
Oh, yes, like that.
Was it like that, or was it like an overall? Or a tight-fitting suit?
It was tight-fitting.
It was tight-fitting, and it was shiny.
Yes.
Could you see his face?
Well, I only saw a glimpse of it.
And you don't remember any individual features?
Well, I only remember that his eyes were quite big.
Eyes were big. And were you afraid?
I was a little afraid.
What did you think it was?
I don't know. I just thought it was some kind of alien from a different planet.
And what did you see?
Well, I saw a silver thing. It was like lying down like this on the side, and I saw a black man. He was dressed in black, and he had big eyes.
Show me with your hand how big the eyes
They
were.
were shaped like something like that.
So that's Selma Siddick 19 years ago. But what I found intriguing about this story was that they came back and interviewed Selma Siddick now at the age of 30. And she basically says everything she saw when she was 11 was true. Okay.
And who I was standing next to, she and I saw like a being, I guess. Oh, but they all looked exactly the same. And
did you actually walk toward the object?
We did not walk towards the object. We walked toward the barrier of the playground, which is sort of where the being was, but not cross the barrier. We didn't cross the barrier. So it was really a lot of, we were inquisitive. What is this? I don't know what this is. And it's sort of, any human being is going to try and rationalize what it is that they're seeing. And as an 11-year-old, we couldn't really put into words what it was we were seeing and trying to justify it. And so, it was very in like a human-esque form, but much shorter, really big head, really big eyes. If it did have a nose, couldn't really see it, but also the skin pigmentation was very, very different. It was very odd. It was nothing like I'd ever seen before. And the closest thing that I could compare what it was wearing would be something like a scuba diving suit. It was just very form-fitting, very black, a little shiny at times, but I don't know if that was just the sun. It was a pretty warm day. It was a beautiful day. Every day is beautiful in Zimbabwe, actually.
So I don't usually talk about my own personal life much in these videos. There's going to be just a tiny bit of that here. So I'm moving towards some kind of an epiphany, okay? And I don't quite understand what's going on in me, but I decided I'm going to look into this. The aerial story has 6 elements: a silvery metallic UFO, a creature with a large head, and then an entity with large almond eyes, a creature that could float up and down into the ship and down to the ground, telepathic communication. That didn't happen to Selma, it happened to the other kids. They felt that the creatures were telling them that the world, that technology was destroying the earth. That's what they had. That's what they said. The creature said to them. And that's a creature that was wearing shiny, skin-tight clothing. So I researched and found 16 stories that were very, very similar to the aerial story in Papua New Guinea, in France, in Ohio, in Kentucky, St. Louis. Okay, now I'm going to show you a couple of these, but I never know if YouTube is going to censor this film clip, so let me describe it. This is a story about a man who saw a UFO outside of his house. He and his friend went out to see it. A ship landed, and then a being floated towards him. Now here's the video. I hope you'll be able to see it.
Heard it from the main source, and that was my father, who in the story is Lucky Sutton, or Elmer Sutton.
Shaped like a saucer streaked through the sky, trailing a rainbow of colors behind it. It settled down in the woods behind the house. When Lucky Sutton came out to check on his friend's seemingly outrageous claim, the 2 men saw something emerge from the woods. Coming toward them was a glowing 3-foot-tall silver being. Its arms were raised in the air over its head, and it was floating. Okay, so there are 16 stories in the literature similar to the aerial Zimbabwe story. But, you know, I'm a social scientist, and a social scientist counts. So I started counting how many times there were descriptions that matched Selma's story, that they had the same size eyes, floating, skin-tight clothing. Okay, there were 60 instances where that story was corroborated by other stories. Okay, and I thought that's a substantial amount of corroboration. So I'm still percolating on all of this. I have a friend who's a private detective, and I said, could you get in touch with Selma Siddiq? I'd like to talk to her. And he said, no problem. And I got her email. It was no difficulty. And I said, I'm a psychologist, a retired professor, and I would like you to see, here are 8 pictures of aliens. I cut them out of magazines. And I said, I'd like to jog your memory. Which of these is closest to your recollection? And so she looked at one and she said, no, 0. I said, rate it on a scale from 0 to 10. That's what psychologists do. So, no, 0, 0, 0, oh, 10. 10. So she identified 2 things as 10. Here they are. These are the things that most closely resemble what she saw when she was 11 years old. One came from a magazine to the right. The other comes from the Roswell Museum. She didn't know that. So I'm starting to put things together, and this kind of is a picture of me, a caricature of me, writing part 1 and part 2 of the book, saying, oh, maybe it's real, it's kind of hypothetical, but I think, you know, there's an awful lot of data, and I'm saying to myself, maybe it's real, okay? And then something happens. That's also a picture of me, a caricature of me, and I'm saying to myself, wait a second, she's telling the truth, okay? She's not trying to sell books. Her coworkers don't even know about her experience, and she hasn't told her coworkers about that. She has a job that has absolutely nothing to do with UFOs. She's an executive in a municipality, and it has nothing to do with this kind of paranormal stuff, okay? She stood 5 feet away from a being from another world. What she saw at 11, she corroborates at the age of 30.
And there are at least 16 independent stories, almost exactly like hers. And so all of a sudden, it sort of hits me. And I say to myself, oh my God, it's real. Okay? It's real. It's true. It's no longer time to be hypothetical. Okay? And if it's all real, I said, now what? Which is the title of this video. If it's real, what questions do we ask now? Have you ever asked these questions, Jerry? Obviously, the questions are, who are they and why are they here? And I never asked those questions. I never got that far. Okay? So welcome to part 3. That's often called Close Encounters of the Fourth and Fifth Kind. Now, there was a professor who classified first kind, second kind, close encounters of the third kind. These are fourth and fifth kind encounters where you actually are in some kind of interaction or close contact with this alien entity. That's what this video is about, okay? Buckle up. Now, there's a lot of junk here. The Bat Child. I'm not interested in National Enquirer data, okay? And there's so much of that. How do you separate it out? This is really embarrassing to tell people what are you working on, Jerry? Well, I'm trying to find out who the aliens are and why they're here. Oh, really? Thanks very much. See you later. All right, so that's what I'm doing. Now I found 3 good sources, all right, that meet my standards of good sources. And I'm going to present them to you in this video in part. And here they are. John Mack, MD, PhD, Harvard, tenured professor, 150 publications, Pulitzer Prize, suddenly gets interested in abductions. Oh, who? But he writes really solid social science prose with good references, documentation. David Jacobs, same thing, tenured professor, writes in the same academic, scholarly style. And Richard Haynes, PhD, experimental psychologist, works for NASA as a research scientist. Now I'm going to start out introducing you to the least weird of these 3 guys. Okay, there's Richard Haynes.
But another illustration of intelligence, and this can be disputed, this can be debated, I understand. I had a B-52 captain tell me once that he was flying in the front left seat of a brand new B-52 from Wichita, Kansas, where it was made by the Boeing Corporation. And his job was to ferry that aircraft with a light crew, not a full crew, to an Air Force base in the southwestern part of America. Clear sunny day, beautiful bright sky, and an object, a round sphere, probably 4 or 5 feet in diameter with no markings, no rivets, no seams, no insignias, no USAF on the side, showed up right off his left wingtip. Well, his co-pilot said, Captain, we have an object off our right wingtip, and he described it, and it was the same shape, size, and identical to this one on the left wing. So there's 2 objects now, keeping up with the aircraft at cruise altitude and cruise speed. Well, to make a long story short, he told me that an object showed up behind the aircraft, above the aircraft, below the aircraft, and off each wingtip, 5 total. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I hit the autopilot button on the control column and went into evasive maneuvers, which is kind of standard operating procedure. Well, he said, no matter what I did with that aircraft, they stayed with the aircraft perfectly aligned. It was called station keeping. So he said, after a while of this, we're running out of fuel and I have a job to do. He said he added power, got back up to cruise altitude, and put it back on autopilot. And he said after 15 or so minutes more, the objects departed from the aircraft in the exact opposite order they arrived. Intelligence. To me, that's not random.
So, Richard Haynes wrote a book called CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. He reviews 242 case files of some kind of interaction with these so-called alien entities. He's very careful He cross-references, he documents, he footnotes, he describes 242 cases. So I want to introduce you to some of these cases, give you an overview of this. So here is a typical case that he describes. In 1952, U.S. Air Force Captain Norman Lamb, he's piloting an F-94 at 18,000 feet. Okay? A UFO appears and emits a dazzling rays of light. The object reaches his level and then takes up a position 500 feet off his right wing, similar to the B-52 story. When Lamb banked toward the UFO reacted, braked, made an erratic move, and then moved out of his range. That's an interaction between one entity and another, and that counts as a close encounter of a fifth kind. So that is a typical story. So he does statistical summaries. When individuals waved or shouted, in 50% of the cases the UFO approached. In 16% of the cases it departed, and in the remainder it did something else. So he has statistical summaries after each of the sections of the cases that he reviews. Okay? So let's talk about people who were aggressive towards UFOs, shooting at them. In 1951, another one of his cases, this was witnessed by 76 people. A UFO approached a military installation and it seemed to pulse. Okay, so soldiers said, "Can we fire at it?" And the commanding officer said, "Go ahead." And they fired an M1 rifle with armor-piercing bullets at this object. It struck the UFO, and they could hear a metallic ping when they hit the UFO. The object seemed to move erratically from side to side. Suddenly, some form of a ray was emitted in pulses, in waves that you could visually see when it was aimed directly at you, like a searchlight. You would feel a burning, tingling sensation all over your body, as though something were penetrating you. So the company commander, Lieutenant Evans, hauled us into our bunkers, and then I saw it shoot off at a 45-degree angle. That quick. Just was there and gone, that quick. The entire episode lasted about 25 minutes. So there's another interaction, and the UFO fires back. This is a much more interesting story. Case 129, seen by 10 witnesses. South Korea, 1974. South Korean Air Force Defense Artillery sees a UFO. It was 700 yards from where they were. The battery commander decided the object was hostile and ordered a Hawk anti-aircraft missile to be fired at the UFO. Okay, what happened? The missile never even got close. Instead, it was hit by a beam of intense white light, and so was the missile launcher from which the Hawk was fired. The Hawk was destroyed along with the missile battery. Okay. Statistical summary about aggression towards UFOs. Quote, with respect to military confrontations, it outmaneuvered the attacking airplane 41% of the time. It destroyed the plane in 4 cases, 23% of the time. It accelerated away 11%, and it either reacted by becoming invisible or in other unspecified ways, 23% of the time. So as you go through this book, you're reading these case histories and these statistical summaries of 242 cases. How about waving, being followed by a UFO? Well, that's a different category. James Dunn and his wife watched a UFO about 100 yards ahead of their car. It was entirely silent and about the size of a Piper Cub airplane, except that it had no wings. They got back in their car and drove away, but the UFO followed them. Dunn accelerated to 95 miles an hour. The UFO continued to follow. The UFO followed them right to Mr. Dunn's sister-in-law's home. When they arrived, they all saw it. They called the state police and Truax Air Force Base, but then the UFO left the area. Okay, how about friendly behavior? Okay, this was witnessed by 36 human witnesses. They saw 4 entities and a ship. It happens in New Guinea in 1969. An Anglican priest saw a UFO 2 nights in a row. I stretched my arm above my head and waved. To our surprise, the figure did the same. Ananias and myself began waving our arms, and all 4 seemed to wave back. There seemed to be no doubt that our movements were answered. Well, got into the Australian newspaper. A priest in New Guinea tells of flying saucers. Men wave. Okay, but they came back the next night. All right, so we're still asking the same question. Who are they and why are they here? What have we learned so far from this? Well, we've learned that the beings appear to be about 3.5 feet tall. That's from part 1 and part 2 of the book, and from what we've learned so far. They never initiate aggression. There's no case in the literature where a UFO starts a fight. But if attacked, they will attack back. They seem to respond to friendly behavior, not all the time, but sometimes. The beings seem to have anti-gravity abilities, just like their UFOs. They seem to just be able to float. So let's now go to the more controversial area, close encounters of the 4th kind. This is where we start talking about abductions. I never liked this area. I've always avoided it, but I'm going to look at it, and I tried my best in the book to be objective and to present this information. Now, there are 2 kinds of abductions I've learned, intentional and unintentional. And the unintentional was, to me, the most impressive, almost the most impressive story of everything I've ever read. This is the case of Travis Walton, 1975. 22-year-old guy. He is a kind of a lumberjack with 5 or 6 other guys, and they go out into the deep forests of Arizona, I forget, and they trim and thin out the trees, and they love their work. It's far away from everybody. It's remote. It's vast. It's beautiful. So they're finishing up one day, getting back in their truck, and by the way, that's Travis Walton today. They see a light in the forest in an area which is always dark. Now, this is a movie that was made, and the picture in this movie actually tells the story very well. So you can see their truck there. Travis Walton and all the other guys see this UFO floating about that height. But Travis jumps out of the truck and runs towards the UFO. The other guys are staying in the truck. Well, as he approached and got closer, he was struck by something like a beam of light, like electrocuted. And they saw his body rise up and fall to the ground in a clump. And they thought, oh my God, they got Travis. They got in their car. They were already in their truck, and they took off. They drove about a half a mile, and they said, wait a minute, we have to go back and get Travis. They turn around to come back and get Travis. Travis is gone. The UFO is gone. Here's a little of Travis.
It was broken up with darker areas, kind of a metallic. It just kind of lit up the whole area and made everything look kind of real weird.
And how big would you say the craft itself was?
It's probably 40 feet or less.
Okay. So I guess at some point, one of the members of the crew said that was a flying saucer?
Yeah, just as soon as we had a clear view of it, the guy in the back yells out, "It's a flying saucer," or UFO, something like that. But I was already throwing open the door and jumping out, thinking it was going to take off before I got going very far. Till I got where, when I was looking up at about a 45-degree angle at it, it suddenly got louder and started to move. It was just kind of a reflex. Instead of just running at that point, I just ducked down behind a log there. And then they were really screaming at me to get back in the truck. I decided to run back to the truck, but when I stood up, I just felt this numbing shock go through my body. It was quite a bit like I touched high voltage or something. But they said it just picked me up and threw me like 15, 20 feet. John said it was like a sack of meat. hit the ground, like there wasn't a bone in my body.
So Travis basically is electrocuted. The next thing he knows, he's inside the UFO, somewhat half conscious, and this is where there are no witnesses. This is just, and he didn't recall this until he was hypnotized, which is true of a lot of abduction cases. So here's his recollection now from inside.
Well, I was in and out for a while. Every time I'd kind of start to wake up, you know, the pain would knock me out. But I finally could see this light above me. I could hear the sounds of movement around me. And what with all this pain, something really terribly wrong inside. I thought maybe I'd been injured and that the crew had taken me to a hospital. So I thought this sounds of movement around me were doctors. And I couldn't focus my eyes. It actually kind of looked like doctors at first. And when I could finally focus my eyes, I could see it was these creatures.
What did they look like?
They were hairless, small, huge eyes, and they just kept staring at me.
So the rest of the story is interesting. The rest of the crew comes back and says, we saw a UFO and they got Travis. And the sheriff said, oh yeah? You must have had an argument and killed Travis and buried his body, and because we don't believe in UFOs, and you're under arrest. And they arrested all 5 members of the team. Okay, this guy was one of them. He was interviewed for this movie, I guess, or this documentary. He said the level of media scrutiny was so much, and the fact that people didn't believe them even after the story ends. He left Snowflake, Arizona, and moved elsewhere. But they subjected all of the members to a series of questions over and over and over again under polygraph. Did you cause Travis Walton any physical injury? Was there a UFO? And so forth. And they all passed. Okay, so they sent out 50 people looking for Travis and helicopters, and nobody found anything. After they had put these guys in jail for attempted murder, but they still hadn't found a body, they figured they buried Travis somewhere they couldn't find. Travis Walton shows up 5 days later.
That's nice.
And the next thing you remember, I guess, is waking up from that anesthesia?
Yeah. I could feel the cold air coming into my clothes. And there was a light above me, and I looked to see where the light was coming from, but it went off just as I looked. But I could still see this shiny hull there hovering above the highway before it went up.
What's your state of mind at this point? Is it relief? Is it?
Oh, it was definitely relief. You know, even in spite of the fact that it was dark and nighttime, I could still recognize this stretch of road, and I felt like I was free. You know, the woods were a familiar environment to me, and I just ran down into the town.
How far is that from here, approximately, where you were dropped off?
Oh, that was probably about 6 miles up the road here. And, you know, you see the phone booths there with the statues, and those are the very phone booths that I called from that night.
So, what is impressive in this story for me is that, first of all, it's a lot of corroboration. All the witnesses are saying the same thing. No corroboration inside the UFO with that. In fact, Travis didn't remember any of that until he was hypnotized and related that story. But the fact that it's consistent over the years is quite interesting. He thinks that he died and that they unintentionally killed him and that they pulled him in and fixed him. He didn't know he had been gone for 5 days. He thought he'd been gone for a couple hours. And then when he called his brother-in-law said, look at yourself. You've got 5 days growth of beard. So that's how he figured out he had been gone for 5 days. It's a very, very intriguing story. So let's talk about our two professors now and their work with abductions. John Mack, David Jacobs. Okay, very controversial area. So now we're talking about intentional abductions. That Travis Walton story had nothing to do with these two authors. These guys are talking about intentional abductions. And so we have 4 books, 2 by John Mack and 2 by David Jacobs. And I'm going to review all 4 of them in a very, very quick, short run here. And what are they saying? Well, to me, the most impressive story of all, I like corroboration. So when it's more than one, it's good. There are 3 women. They go to a restaurant. They're driving their car. They see a bright object in front of them, and the object is descending towards them. Well, the next thing they knew, they were 6 miles down the road, and an hour and a half had passed. They continued on home, and they experienced burning sensations on their faces. When water touched them, they noticed they had similar red marks on the backs of their necks. They couldn't remember what had happened. They all went under hypnosis, that they were put on an examining table, that strange 3.5-foot sized creatures studied them, and that was quite intrusive. Here's a bit of a video on that in case YouTube doesn't censor it. I hope you'll be able to enjoy it.
Begins here at what was once Redwood Restaurant. Past 11, the birthday party was over. With Louise driving the Chevy Nova, the 3 women headed down Route 78, a narrow winding road, an intense red glow heading toward their car, inching closer and closer, until Mona says the object stopped and hovered next to the right side of the car. She says it was a bluish-white dome.
I said, Lou, step on the gas, let's get out of here. And I looked down, I said, man, you're going 85 miles an hour. She just picked her feet up and said, Mona, I'm not touching it, not touching the pedal.
And it's here the women say that their car finally stopped after going nearly 85 miles per hour. But the car didn't stop entirely. In fact, they say it backed up, heading towards a very dark area, an unknown farm to all 3 of the women. What happened after that forever is written in UFO history. These drawings describe what each woman says happened next. Mona, she lie on a table being observed. All 3 women say they were burned.
Went to my family doctor, and that's when he said, yes, I've had serious radiation.
Their story was the talk of the town and eventually the talk of UFO researchers.
So I liked their corroboration under hypnosis, and they all told very similar stories. I'm not going to go through all of them, but here is the overview. Of all those 4 books I cited, the individual gets abducted and experiences lost time. You can't remember. They are shown pictures, often, not always, of chaos and human destruction, as if humanity is destroying the world. And they're shown pictures of the future. Under hypnosis, their memory comes back and it reveals a sexual reproductive project in which eggs and sperm are taken, and sometimes they have talked to the aliens who are very, very evasive, but they have said, we're trying to create children of the future. Okay? They talk about incubatoriums, where they see fetuses in jars growing or incubating, or nurseries where they have already been born, and some of them have wisps of hair. They also talk about mind scan, where the alien entity comes up very close to your face and kind of reads your mind with their large black almond eyes. So that's the 40 or 50 or 80 case histories. Now I didn't like this data, but I had to force myself to try to look at it objectively. So I want to give you the pros and cons, because I respect these professors. Well, one of the pros is that these are distinguished professors who are doing this and risking their careers. John Mack was not retired when he did it, and his career was really, really besmirched by his involvement in this. Also, there's a problem which I call the problem of the rainbow-colored porcupine. Here it is. This is a pro. In other words, here, let's say you have a patient who has a dream, and I dreamt that there was a rainbow-colored porcupine sitting at the foot of my bed. and it was scary. Well, that's certainly a bad nightmare. So there's another person who has a dream and says, I had a dream of a rainbow-colored porcupine sitting at the foot of my bed. You say, wow, well, that's a coincidence. You just had another patient just like that. And then you read about a woman in Scotland who had a dream of a rainbow-colored porcupine sitting at the foot of it. Pretty soon you're going to start saying, well, maybe there are rainbow-colored porcupines. That's metaphorically what's going on here. People are telling the same story, and it is weird. They're subject to physical examinations that were people didn't fantasize about them. Vaginal scrapes, scraping the bottom of a person's foot, injecting something into their rib cage, taking a tissue of gum sample. These are weird and bizarre stories, but they're consistent across individuals. Max studied 200 cases. Jacob says he has heard of egg-taking procedures 150 times, physical examinations 400 times, mind scan 375 times, baby and toddler contact 180 times.
I simply have not been able to discover any way to even remotely begins to account for this other than the thing itself, whatever it is.
Are you saying that aliens from outer space or some other place are actually abducting human beings?
The fact is that people who are reliable witnesses are speaking with great emotion, conviction about experiences that are like that.
That was John Mack. Now I'd like to give the cons, because I don't like this stuff, and so here are my reasons why I don't like it. First, almost all of the patients that they talk about speak English, and they're from the West. If aliens are abducting humans, they should be abducting Chinese and Indians a lot more than Americans and English-speaking people. The sample is definitely skewed. And secondly, if you read their chapters carefully, there are not as many cases as they say they have. John Mack's book has only 40 cases. One of the chapters of David Jacobs on incubatoriums is only talking about 11 people. Almost all of them are women. So the sample size gets smaller and smaller and smaller and makes me doubt. But the thing that really made me doubt was, I know that one of these cases is false. There's a case of a boy named Francis, 17 years old, 1975. He is hypnotized. He said he was abducted, and they have a whole transcript of his talk with the alien. He asked the alien, and he were discussing things. The alien showed Francis a picture of the Earth being enveloped by something like a radiation cloud, which looked very terrible to Francis. And Francis said, my God, when is that going to happen? He said, when you're about 40. And Francis said, oh, good, I've got a lot of time left, because he was only 17. Okay, well, that story was done at 75. That means that when Francis turned 40, it was 1999, and the Earth was not enveloped in a cloud of radiation, which means either the alien was wrong or Francis's hypnotic recollections were incorrect. So if you're a lawyer, and there are 39 other cases, your lawyer says this case is obviously false. So what about the other 39? Reasonable doubt. Anyway, those are the cons, and that is the review that I tried to make of this literature. So let's go back to our question. Who are they? Why are they here? And see what we've learned. Well, so summary so far, the beings seem to be 3.5 feet tall, large heads, almond-shaped eyes. So where did we get that? Well, we got that information from Selma Siddiq. We got it from similar stories to the Ariel Zimbabwe story. We got that from Travis Walton and his accounting. We got it from abductions. We also got it from Roswell. And strangely enough, as I was making this video, there was a news flash. Let me tell you about the news flash. There's Walter Haut soldier in 1947. He was the press officer who said a flying saucer crashed in Roswell. The next day he said, no, it was a weather balloon. And he lied. Now he kept that story going. Close to his death, he signed an affidavit saying that was all a lie. There really was a crash and there really were bodies. Okay? Now that we knew. But last week, a video surfaced. Now he died. Walter Haut died 15 years ago. But a video surfaced of a movie made, a private movie of Walter Haut, and it made the headlines. Ex-Army officer admits he saw alien the size of a 10-year-old child. Okay, that's Walter Haut. So here's an excerpt.
The best of my resemblance, it was a relatively small body, comparable to maybe a 11-year-old, 10 or 11-year-old child. It was pretty well beat up.
So that's Walter. So that's our first summary, but we have a lot more to summarize here. The beings that exist seem to have slits for mouths and never appear to eat or drink. There's not a single story showing them eating or drinking that I have ever encountered. They seem to have anti-gravity abilities like their ships, and they seem to be able to float. As far as their ships are concerned, they never initiate aggression, but if attacked, they will attack, and they're always superior in that. They seem to respond to friendly behavior, but not always, okay? They seem to be observing us. Now, if you go back to part 1 and part 2 of my book, and you're asking, why are they here? Well, the one thing is they really seem to be concerned about our nuclear developments. Roswell, after all, in 1947 was the first nuclear base that ever existed, and they have had lots of UFO stories about looking at missile silos in Montana and Wyoming, UFOs spotted in Los Alamos and Indian Point, New York, where there's a nuclear plant, B-52s carrying nuclear weapons, Bentwaters, England, which was the largest nuclear base in Europe, Voronezh, USSR, UFO spotted where there's a nuclear plant, Kostroma, USSR, a nuclear plant, Bielokhorovich in the Ukraine where there was a nuclear plant, and most recently, Esfahan, Iran. That's a lot of UFO sighting. Now, curious data. The CIA released a whole bunch of documents last year. They were forced to by Congress. Most of them are BS, okay? They don't say anything. But I've been reading them, about 10 a day, for a couple months. I still have hundreds to go through. I don't see much, but I found one. That's the document right there. And it says, an announcer read a report over video on a UFO that landed near Esfahan yesterday. Esfahan, Iran, has a nuclear facility. UFO buffs didn't know that. So we have to add Esfahan, Iran to the list. Okay? And that's quite a large list of nuclear facilities where UFOs have been spotted. What else? They seem to be concerned about our destruction of the planet. We have two sources of evidence here. That's the Ariel story. Those little girls and boys said, some of them said that's what they were trying to tell them. But also the abduction stories, which were questionable, but still many of the abduction stories are talking about their concern about our destruction of our planet. And they may be experimenting with our biology to create children of the future, but I would like to underscore maybe. That is a maybe. I don't think there's enough data to develop that and to make that more than just hypothetical. So that is what we know. But there are some problems that come with all this from my side of the story, okay? And they have to do with problems of logic. Listen, if aliens are concerned about saving humanity and our destruction of the planet, is landing on a playground and telepathically communicating to children, is that really the best way to do it? Come on, fellas. This is not the best way of trying to save the planet by hypnotizing 11-year-old girls. Okay? It's not logical. So, the question of logic is this. If this is all real, how about a little help? If you're concerned about our nuclear potential, of our nuclear bases, of our destruction of the planet, how about a little help? How about some real help? How about some technology transfer? Solar power, hydrogen fuel, you know how to do it. Nuclear fusion, you know how to do it. Why not tell us? Now that's a question you have to come back to. But I have an answer for that, okay? It is a hypothesis, a final hypothesis for you to consider seriously, okay? And that is that crop circles may be attempts to communicate with humanity and to transfer technology as well. Let me explain. A couple of these you've seen before, very quickly. This is a crop circle that appeared across the river from a nuclear power plant that was 46 years old. Those large circles with 6 rings around them could represent 3 radioactive elements: polonium, astatine, cesium, all of which are produced in nuclear power plants across the river. This is a crop circle that was an attempted warning that this could result in a fissile reaction, a Chernobyl-like event. It was a warning. The year after the crop circle, there was another accident in this dinosaur of a facility, and they finally decided to shut it down. Not because of the crop circle, but it was a warning. Now, I wrote a book called Messages from the Gods, a scientific exposition on the extraterrestrial origin of crop circles. Very controversial. I found 40 crop circles out of 4,000 that I understood, with about 10 or 12 other scientists that I sort of co-opted to help me decipher them, decode them. And let me give you a few more. Some of these you've seen, most of these you haven't. Stick with me. This was a crop circle that appeared just at about the time COVID-19 was reaching serious status globally as one of the leading causes of death on the planet. I thought that looked like COVID-19. It had spike proteins, 9 of them. It had 3 small circles in the center. After all, RNA is in the center of the virus, and this crop circle has 3 small circles representing the 3 letters of RNA. Very complex discussion. I'm cutting to the chase here and giving you just the messages without the rationale. Here's one. A crop circle right in front of a chalk mine. What in God's name would that mean? Well, there are 3 white rings around these circles and 2 white rings around these circles, and a little bit of thinking, consulting with scientists. The inner circle rings could represent H2O, water, and the circle rings could represent calcium carbonate. Mix the 2 together and you're well on your way to having cement. Chalk mines are there to make cement. Cement is one of the most polluting industries in the whole global warming panorama. That's CO2. This is cement production. Okay, it's one of the most toxic industries. That's the discussion in the book, which I'm skipping. So here's the translation of the message into English, which is what I tried to do. Here's a translation from E.T., if you will. The production of cement is releasing vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is impacting the planet's health and the survivability of your species. That was a message. Here's another one. One of the 40. A magnetar is formed when 2 colliding neutron stars meet. Up until the time of this crop circle, all scientists believe that when neutron stars collided, they formed a black hole. But they do, but sometimes they form magnetar. They're very rare. That is the most magnetic object in the known universe. Only 10 in the whole Milky Way. This appeared, this is a long discussion, and I'm cutting to the chase. This crop circle appeared on July 13th. A magnetar, a rare magnetar, was visible the next day. Here's the message. Pay attention to a coming magnetar event. It will occur very soon. It will teach you more about the origin of gamma ray bursts, magnetism, and the physics of neutron star mergers. Holy cow. This is a gigantic crop circle, bigger than a football field. If you look closely, you can see a couple people standing there. And an enterprising microbiologist said, my God, that's melatonin. And he said, that's a long discussion, he said that is the chemical signature of melatonin. And he has superimposed it on the crop circle, and it was just like a perfect fit down to the electron. Why would someone make a crop circle of melatonin? It's a sleep aid. But then again, if you do your research, you say, wait a minute, maybe there's more to it. Well, there is more to melatonin. Beyond sleep regulation, melatonin plays a role in spermatogenesis. The hotter it is, the less viable the sperm. We know that our sperm counts are going down. We think it's only for humans. No, it's for vertebrates. All the vertebrates in the animal kingdom are experiencing lower sperm counts because it's getting warmer. This crop circle appears statistically in the hottest week of the year. Here's the message. Human-induced alterations in your planet's climate will have a negative effect on your progeny. It is important for you to learn about melatonin and its impact on human and vertebrate fertility. The survival of your species and other living creatures depends upon it. Wow, I had no idea that melatonin had that effect. Here's a crop circle that was so beautiful. We're supposed to believe this is made by vandals in the middle of the night with that exactitude, with no dogs barking, no tire tracks. Give me a break. So what does it mean? Well, here's the translation, long discussion. A magnetar in your Milky Way in a constellation which you call Camelopardalis is unusual in that it generates outbursts from its interior more than typical magnetars. By studying its rotation and energy bursts, you will increase your understanding of gravity and magnetism. Here's a crop circle, one circle surrounded by six circles, surrounded by six circles. What is it? Well, sulfur is the center circle, and fluoride are the other six circles, and the six circles around those are six valence electrons, and that's sulfur hexafluoride. I had no idea what that was. Long discussion. I'm skipping the discussion, okay? Sulfur hexafluoride is manufactured by human beings. It is an extremely toxic greenhouse gas, 23,000 times more potent than CO2. And when it gets in the atmosphere, it stays there for centuries, 1,000 years. Okay? And we keep producing it. Translation. Your species is producing highly toxic sulfur hexafluoride, and it will impact the health of your planet and your progeny for generations. Long discussion. I'm skipping that rationale. If you think I'm going too fast, you'll have to read the book. So here's two crop circles. They look very similar. One 2018, one 2014. How do you decode them? Well, it turns out they seem to be very closely related to lunar eclipses. Long discussion. Translation into English. Lunar eclipses slow the rotation of your planet and release earthquakes, volcanoes, and changes in your magnetosphere. You do not know enough about these cycles of these eclipses and their impact on the internal processes of your planet. Wow. We'll take that under advisement. And another in France. Look carefully, baby, you can see a speck in the center. That's a person. This is a gigantic crop circle. I thought it would be simple. It isn't that simple. So the big circle represents helium with 2 electrons, and the little circle represents hydrogen with 1 electron. So you've got helium and hydrogen. That crop circle's in France, about 150 miles north of France's gigantic construction project trying to make a fusion reactor, which still doesn't work. Multi-million-dollar project. By the way, the half circle, we decided, represents a fermion with an overall spin of 1/2. So here's the translation. Revise your approaches to nuclear fusion and pursue the deuterium interaction that produces helium-3. Study helium, its quantum asymmetries, chaotic orbital trajectories, and half spin. This will better help you achieve your goal of fusion. Advice. I rarely see a crop circle made by extraterrestrials that has a human form. I thought this was made by humans, therefore. But if you look at the people in there, it's a gigantic thing. It's well done, no tire tracks. And I thought, what if that's a rare crop circle depicting a woman? So archetypally, it is called the spiral goddess that dates back to before the Great Pyramid, 3500 BC. But I'm still wondering why. July 27, 2008. Could it have something to do with the Lehman Brothers collapse 46 days later? The Great Recession? $2 trillion lost? 6% decline worldwide in GDP? 200 million people worldwide lost their jobs? What's that have to do with this woman? And then I read an article on the Lehman Sisters hypothesis. I thought it was a serious article saying men take risks differently than women. Men handle debt differently than women. If women were in charge, maybe this would not have happened. In fact, here is the quote from the president of Iceland, Vigdis Finnbogadóttir. This is what she said. The financial bubble was created almost exclusively by men, specifically young males hooked on excessive risk-taking. Hence, it should not come as a surprise that it has been suggested that the financial collapse would not have taken place, or would at least not have been as severe if women had been at the helm. Translation of the crop circle is a long discussion. Here it is. Balance your masculine, aggressive, avaricious energies with their feminine counterpart, or the resulting imbalance and excess will lead to global economic devastation. It did. We didn't listen. But the message was delivered. Okay, here's a crop circle. Looked an awful lot like methane. That's the methane molecule. This is the methane Lewis diagram, which is almost an exact description down to the electron. Here's methane ascending, increasing in Antarctic, Greenland, Tasmania, no stopping. The two major sources of methane in the world are the United States, fracking industry, and the melting of the permafrost in the Arctic. Methane is 84 times worse than CO2. Here's a video I showed in another thing. It's a Russian man and his son putting a hole in the permafrost and igniting the escaping methane. Look at this. He's saying in Russian, be careful, son.
Держи факел. Кислее подбей. Только аккуратно.
Translation of the crop circle. Pay more attention to methane. It threatens to cause grave harm to your planet and your species. Thank you, E.T. All right, one more. This is a crop circle that I thought was peculiar. I thought it was human. I thought it was like a yin-yang thing. There was another one like that. I was not interested if it was made by humans. That's a diagram. That's a diagram. So I wrote to professors. I'm a retired professor. When I write to a professor, often they will politely reply to me. But I never mention crop circles. Otherwise, you go right to their spam folder. So I showed them 2 designs, and I said, this is a professor of mathematical topography. Big dude, okay? And I said, to me, these 2 diagrams look similarly, but I wonder if there's a mathematical difference between them. One looks like a piece of jewelry. The other, I'm not so sure. Do you see any mathematical differences here? That was my question. He said, the one on the right is like a piece of jewelry. It's 2-dimensional. But the one on the left is extremely, extremely interesting. You have to research the Klein-4 group. I don't know what the Klein-4 group is. It's a long-standing equation in physics and mathematics. Here's an article called The Klein-4 Group and Darboux Duality in Conformal Mechanics. I can barely pronounce it. In the journal High Energy Physics. Could I just read 2 lines to you? The first 2 lines. We study the Klein-4 group symmetry of the time-dependent Schrodinger equation. Remember Schrodinger's cat, quantum mechanics, Schrodinger equations, Klein-4 group, crop circle. This is not a silly crop circle. This crop circle was put down in 2006. That article was in 2019. Crop circle seems to be ahead of itself. Translation. Deciphering the mathematical properties of this design will assist you in your study of astrophysics and quantum mechanics. Thank you, E.T. Complicated discussion. So, what about technology transfer? Are they going to transfer some to us? Well, some enterprising crop circle people have said that we think this is a diagram of what is called a frictionless magnetic gears, and they attempted to manufacture or make a gear that is similar to this crop circle. So that was a short overview, all right? Scratching the surface, just 40 crop circles. I didn't present 40. There are 40 in the book. I presented what, 12? 40 out of 4,000. Now, what did we learn just from these 40? Well, we learned that whoever is making this crop circle is concerned with human welfare and human fertility. That's one thing we learned. Secondly, we learned these crop circles seem to be pedagogical. They're attempting to teach us about gravity, magnetars, fusion, gamma rays, neutron stars. And they are also concerned with the planet, with nuclear meltdown, and with global emissions of methane and sulfur hexafluoride, right? Now that knowledge that we just got came from the study of 1% of the crop circles, okay? 1%. What would happen if we actually woke up from our slumber and started to pay attention? What else is there? What secrets are found in this? I mean, this is beyond my intelligence or anyone else's. We need to have a consortium of people studying this to try to decode it. What is this? You see the people standing in the beginning of this? What is this trying to say? What does that mean? What is the message of this? Never been decoded successfully, in my opinion. What about that? Gigantic. What is it saying? Is it about planets? What is this? How do we decode this? It seems awfully mathematical. What is it? And this? Completely unknown. Most academics say don't pay any attention to it. Why? They're all made by humans. Really? That was made by humans in the middle of the night without barking dogs or tire tracks? With that level of exactitude and that size? Are you kidding me? Don't bother decoding it. Who? Why? You must be crazy to try to decode it. Maybe there are 25 people in the world, to my knowledge, who are seriously attempting to decode these things. We need to have 5,000. Okay, this is serious stuff. And it's just sitting there, vanishing, getting plowed under, misunderstood, not understood, not even studied. So here's a concluding thought. We are living in the dark ages of delusion and denial. All right? Well over 1 million American university professors are saying there's nothing to pay attention to here. Go away. There's nothing to see. All man-made, just silly designs. Put your head in the sand. And that is the current state. That's the mainstream attitude about crop circles and about most of this stuff. Okay? Does President Obama agree? Is there really nothing here, Mr. Obama?
Prying information out of the bowels of an agency can be challenging.
UFOs? Any UFOs? Did you ask about that?
Certainly asked about it.
And?
Can't tell you. Sorry.
Okay. All right, I'll take that as a yes. Because if there were none,
Why
you'd say
not?
there was none, right? You just played your hand. I thought you were a poker player. You just 100% showed your river card.
Feel free to think that.
I do.
I want to tell you a story about Avi Loeb, who's the chairman of the Department of Astronomy at Harvard. Pretty prestigious job. I don't think he's a UFO believer, but an event occurred this year. An object came into our solar system and then left, and it was called Oumuamua. And he looked at it and he said, "This does not behave like a comet. It does not behave like an asteroid. It accelerated when it wasn't supposed to accelerate." And he said, "I'm not sure. I don't think it's manned, but I think it's an extraterrestrial craft or a portion of an extraterrestrial craft, something that was engineered." Okay, I believe this was engineered, okay, by an intelligence. Now, I don't want to go into the argument for that. I want you to listen to what he said about his colleagues.
Why is it that the scientific community finds it so difficult to embrace that in a genuine way?
Because it takes it out of its comfort zone. You know, there was a colloquium about Oumuamua at Harvard, and when I left the room after it was over with a colleague of mine that worked on rocks in the solar system for decades, that colleague said, "Oumuamua is so weird, I wish it never existed." And I was appalled by that, because in science, when you are presented with evidence that doesn't quite conform with what you expected, that's an opportunity to learn something new. Nobody expected a century ago that we would come up with quantum mechanics, which is currently the foundation for all the devices that we use. And that was a complete surprise, and Albert Einstein resisted the inference from quantum mechanics that there is spooky action at a distance. He was wrong. It took him out of his comfort zone. It still takes us out of our comfort zone, but that's not an indication that quantum mechanics is wrong. We just need to learn from the evidence and revise our notions, and we should be open-minded. So it's not a matter of how many likes an idea has on Twitter. The question is, what does the evidence tell us? And if the evidence looks credible and scientific, as in the case of Oumuamua, we should contemplate a revision to our prejudice.
So that's it. Overcoming our prejudices means opening up our minds and not holding rigidly to old orthodoxies. But that is exactly where the academic world is as I speak, okay? It means leaving our comfort zone. It means confronting what is called ontological shock. We are facing a major revision in how we see the world if UFOs exist. Here's Graham Hancock, another professor, not a UFO devotee, but someone who is underscoring how much the academic world is denying and how much it needs to change.
Of Atlantis. So this subject has been tackled again and again and again. And again, mainstream academia has said, no, it's impossible. There could be no lost civilization. We know everything about the past, and it's been dismissed. But the problem is that new evidence keeps coming out, which can't be explained by the existing historical model. New evidence that just doesn't fit the picture. And my sense is that this evidence is now becoming overwhelming and that we're reaching a tipping point. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year. But within our lifetimes, we are going to see a completely new understanding of the past, a radical revisioning of the past, and therefore of our place in the world as well.
So, the dark ages that we are now living under do not end quickly. It's bound by prejudice, by denial, by delusion, by orthodoxy, by mainstream conformity in our academic disciplines, and also by cowardice. There are a lot of professors who'd like to go into this area, but there's too much shame and worry and fear in doing that. So it takes a long time to have a paradigm shift. You cannot find any serious academic course on UFOs, extraterrestrial contacts, or crop circles in any major university in the United States. I was looking, I found one at Duke, not in their regular undergraduate or graduate program, in continuing education. And it was about UFOs. And look at the syllabus. It says this course rests on two premises. UFOs are a myth. That's the only way you can teach the course. It's a lie. It's heresy. It's a myth. Okay? Schopenhauer said, all truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. Well, we're in the stage one of ridicule, okay? Any professor who is remotely interested in these subjects is subject to ridicule, condemnation, and being ostracized by his peers, and certainly disqualified from any serious consideration for tenure if he starts dabbling in these subjects. Giordano Bruno, like Galileo, said the earth revolves around the sun. He was sentenced to death and burned at the stake at the age of 52, and as they were passing sentence on him, he said, the time will come when all will see what I see. Well, today we all see what he saw. That was 500 years ago. But listen to his next sentence. I await your sentence with less fear than you pass it. Meaning, I'm not afraid of death as much as you're afraid of dealing with the new paradigm that you face, that the world is not as you think it is. You have been living in a delusion. After 350 years, the Vatican finally said Galileo was right. Last week, 359 years later, the Church finally agreed. At a ceremony in Rome before the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Pope John Paul II officially declared that Galileo was right. The first step in this change of paradigm is to admit that you are wrong, and we are not there yet. Ptolemy, in 100 AD, said the Earth was the center of the solar system, and the sun revolved around it. That mistake, that delusion, lasted for 1,300 years in science and 1,900 years in the popular academic world. It was denied for 1,900 years. We lived in the Dark Ages, okay? The church finally recognized that Ptolemy was wrong 1,900 years later, and this is a bigger story than that. Admitting UFOs is a bigger story, a bigger challenge, a bigger threat than admitting the Earth revolves around the sun. That is what this talk is about. That's why this is such a critical issue in our time, okay? And the first step is to admit we have been wrong. Now, what does that mean? That means, what if? Well, we teach the Greek gods, Zeus, Demeter, Hera, Gaia, Kronos, all the gods of Greece, the immortals, the demigods, that's all false. We've always been taught that's false. There were no beings, there were no immortals, there were no celestial entities that came to this planet. There were no aliens or UFOs. That's all make-believe. That's what we're taught in our history books, in our archaeology books, in anthropology, okay? Just another example of human proclivity to superstitious thinking. So What if what we were taught is all wrong? That's what we mean by a paradigm shift. The Egyptian gods, Osiris, Horus, Hathor, are described in the pyramid texts as coming from the stars, governing us, having large heads, okay, like Selmacidic saw. No, that's not true. It's false. It's mythological. It's pure fantasy. It's fake news. We do not believe it. That is not what is true. It is nothing more than an illustration of humankind's penchant for superstitious thinking. Your exam will be on Tuesday. Well, what if that is all wrong? The Sumerian gods, Enlil and Ki, Utu, who came from the heavens, who the Song of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian cylinder seals, that talk about the gods tutoring human beings. All false, all fake news, just fantasy, mythology, fable, folklore, not true. There are no aliens. There are no extraterrestrials. Nobody came from the stars in human history. All fake. Your exam is on Tuesday. Regurgitate that, please, because that's the mainstream orthodoxy. Well, what if what we were taught is all wrong? The Mesoamerican gods, Viracocha, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, the Popol Vuh of the Mayans, talk about the gods coming from the stars. Here, knowledgeable, teaching, ruling. Not true. Fable, fantasy, mythology, fake news. We do not want to hear it. Okay? Like the professor said, I wish it didn't exist. Well, that's what we live in the era of I wish it didn't exist. This is nothing more than fable, fantasy, fake news, mythology, and another example of man's need for superstitious thinking. Well, what if that is wrong? The Asian gods, the Japanese Nihongi, the funny names, Amaterasu, Izanagu, Pangu, Nuwu, Shangadi, Chinese gods, came from the stars, messengers from the stars. Fake news, fable, fantasy, mythology, couldn't happen, didn't happen. We decided it couldn't happen, therefore it didn't happen. That's the dogma of the church that teaches in our universities today. Tests are on Tuesday. What if that's all wrong? The Indian gods, Atman, Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, the Mahabharata, they talk about these celestial beings flying around in chariots of fire. Not true. Fake news, fable, fantasy, mythology. Couldn't happen, didn't happen. We refuse to believe it might have happened. Test is on Tuesday. What if we're taught all of that stuff? And what if that's all wrong? Same true with archaeology. Look at all these drawings. Oh, no. These people must have been stoned on peyote drawing pictures of people with large heads. They were not trying to record an unusual event of contact with an extraterrestrial species that was so much more powerful and wonderful and awesome than we are. That couldn't be part of this artwork. These strange things have to be, even though they look just like what Selmacidic saw and what they saw at Roswell, no, impossible. We have decided it's impossible. These creatures are just manifestations of mankind's need for superstitious drawing and taking peyote and just scribbling on the sides of rocks. No almond eyes. What if that's all wrong? Okay, I think you've had enough. But if we admit UFOs are real, okay, our world is really turned upside down. Our academic world is turned upside down. It means we need to admit we were wrong. It means the academic world needs to find the courage to face its ontological crisis. We are on the edge. I don't know if the Pentagon's release this summer of more UFO information is going to tip the scales. I doubt it. But we are on the edge of a paradigm shift in archaeology, in history, in biology, in anthropology, in religion, philosophy, mythology, and it starts by saying we were wrong and we need to revise our thinking. So all the footnotes for this talk are in these 2 books that I wrote, and I want to thank you for your kind attention. Take care.